Good afternoon. My name is Anna Waligórska, and I come partly because of the research that was referred at the last Autism Europe Congress. We started researching whether persons with Asperger syndrome differs in understanding of narratives and whether it has any cognitive significance to them. It appeared that yes, and that's why we decided to carry it further. We wanted to find out whether narrative techniques can be helpful and valuable help in their therapy to help them understand other people's feelings. I'm sorry for the inconveniences. I'm quite high, and I hope you will hear me better. To start with, the problem of understanding narratives is generally a problem in autism spectrum disorder. Individuals with Asperger syndrome usually prefer categorical mode of thinking. Jerome Bruner once distinguished between two major modes of thinking. The first one would be categorical mode. This is like logical mode, systemizing mode. And when we think about Asperger syndrome teenagers or adults who want to gather information about their special interests, this is their preferred mode of thinking. The other mode of thinking is narrative mode. And usually, typically developing persons tend to think in narration about their lives, about their friends, about what's going to happen, what are their goals, how they want to achieve it. We think about ourselves in some kind of micro story. We call it auto-narration. And it's like even healthy people, when they lack narrative competence, they would have problems in setting life goals. They would have problems in determining what they are going to do to achieve their purpose. And as I think most of us know, this is also a major problem in Asperger syndrome therapy. They do not know what their life goal is, and even if they know, they don't have motivation enough, then they don't know how to plan, to act, to make it real. So basically, on the last Autism Europe conference, we reported that some people with Asperger syndrome can create fictional narratives, and this would be an example, a little comic story drawn by Asperger syndrome adult, but usually their stories are quite different from the stories of healthy, undisturbed persons. I mean, their stories lack personal perspective, their stories lack understanding of obstacles and the ways to overcome them. So, just to remind, generally the full narrative should include a hero. In this case, it is Perseus. Should include his intentions and actions, and here he wants to rescue Andromede. Inevitably, an obstacle appears, and then we have a success or failure. So the problem is that usually persons with Asperger syndrome do not fully embrace understanding of the narrative scheme. They, as many research reported, they have a problem with use of cause-effect relationships. They very rarely explain heroes' emotions and intentions, and rarely form a causal reconstruction of psychological states. And why is it important? It is important because it's a crucial factor of one's motivation to act, to overcome obstacles, and to achieve life goals that are very important for his development. So, the main topic of our research was whether narrative techniques could be assistant technique in Asperger syndrome therapy. In healthy population, it is so. I mean, persons who have deficits in understanding narratives, when confronted with some narrative training, narrative techniques, were better motivated and worked harder towards goal achievement. In our case, we met with a very basic difficulty. They do not understand narrative often at all. So we wanted to measure it through the cool action control scale. The concept of this scale is that an equivalent of motivation is willpower. It would be perseverance in implementing one's intentions. It would be the strength to act. Cool distinguish between two motivational states. The first one is passive, state orientation. The other one is active, and it's proactive orientation. This illustration should differentiate a bit about the states. This is part of our narrative training, but here on the first picture you see a boy who is definitely attracted to one of the girls, but he wouldn't know what to do. He just contemplates this attraction and contemplates that he likes the girl, but he doesn't do anything. On the second picture, we see a proactive orientation. We see a real doing. So basically, most of the people with Asperger syndrome lacks this proactive orientation. They would stop at the first phase, at this state passive orientation. And also Kuhl distinguished between three types of orientation. It's important only because of the research aspects. The first orientation is in the situation after experienced failure. What should I do when my plans wouldn't go as I wanted? The second one is the orientation when performing operations. So if I started, can I focus on the purpose? And the third one would be decision-making situations. When I have a choice, what should I do? So basically, the second type of orientation is not difficult for persons with Asperger syndrome because they can focus on the subject if they like it. I mean, if this is their special interest, special topics, they obviously would be very, very highly attracted to the purpose. However, they have great difficulties to decide what to do when they have to choose something, or to decide what to do if their plans were ruined. So, how we tracked the link between it and how we wanted to measure it. The first thing is that we understood it as one of the aspects in the core of narrative, this dysfunction. Because a dysfunction of narrative competence brings a problem with understanding the activities in the context of the aimed result. I mean, I know what I would like, but I do not know how to plan it. Persons with Asperger syndrome would tend to focus rather on the state, but not on the action that would lead to it. Also, detailed thinking wouldn't help.
5 minutes.
Thank you. So, generally, it ends with problems with objective achievement. How to find the motivation and the strength to act. Metaphorically, it would be a person with Asperger syndrome as a wanderer. He is attracted to various things, but he has no clear purpose. So, how did it go? We thought that the proactive orientation requires a focus on intentions, goals, actions, and overcoming obstacles. This is the core of narrative. So the objectives of our training was firstly teaching them to understand reality in terms of narrative, and then paying attention to the cause and effect relationship. So we expected that narrative training should support the understanding of actions in terms of aimed purpose, and therefore we hoped it would increase motivation towards proactive orientation. The research question were, can the narrative competence of persons with Asperger's syndrome be developed? The second was, is the development of narrative competence affecting the willpower and motivation? Research scheme was, as you see, an repeated measures experiment. We have both experimental and control group consisting of 15 persons, each with diagnosed Asperger's syndrome. On the first measurement, they were measured with Kuhl's action control scale, and there were also measurements of their narration and self-narration by competent raters. Then the experimental group underwent narrative training lasting 10 weeks, and we concluded with the second measurement similar to the first. Narrative training was mostly visual because of the preference for this mode in Asperger's syndrome individuals. We had detailed script for trainers, and each script modeled a particular element of narrative scheme. Generally, tasks started with very easy, very simple tasks, and were gradually more complex. And this, what you see, is a very, very simple task with which we started working about overcoming obstacles. Obstacles is quite simple, but participants had to find out the possible and acceptable solution, and they also had to narrate a story. On the consequent meetings, they also had to solve very complex tasks and to refer them to their own lives. So what were the results? Was it successful? I think yes, because firstly, only experimental group underwent progress when having proactive orientation after failure. They declared they knew what to do. Also, they had visible progress in decision-making situations. Making choices was less difficult for them, as they reported in the action control scale. Thirdly, we wanted to track whether their narratives would improve, whether they were more able to think about themselves in terms of stories. And here progress was only visible in the group of higher functioning individuals. I think this is a suggestion that for lower functioning individuals, narrative training should last longer or be more intensive, or both. But to conclude, I think we might say that narrative training is one of the methods that would enrich another ways of teaching persons with Asperger's syndrome to act and to achieve life goals. This was part of the major project, therapeutic group for people with Asperger's syndrome, but it proved efficient, and it proved, in fact, actually really not so time-consuming. So, considering that they had serious difficulties at the beginning, we think it might be one of the aspects that would lead them to success in their lives. So, we want to include this narrative training in our further therapy and our further research, and I hope that on the next Autism Europe conference, I could tell you some more about bigger groups, other tools, other techniques, and I hope other successes as well. Thank you very much.